All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started just to keep us on schedule. Can everybody hear me without the mic? I prefer not to be up, down, up, down. And also, can everybody see this okay? Because I kind of like it when the lights are on a little bit, keep everybody awake. All right, and like everybody else, don't feel like you're going to need to take notes because all the presentation materials are on the 50-mile long URL that Daniela gave out this morning. But I also put together a quick website for us, and we'll go through that as well today. So I have the great fortune of getting to continue the conversation that Scott and Jeff started this morning. We talked about storytelling with your actual property. How exciting is that? And really designing for an experience. And then Jeff went into a lot more detail about how you actually have to be thoughtful about designing the marketing story that you're telling. And he's got an agency and a team of professionals that do that for a number of different companies, real estate and otherwise. I want to really focus in on that sweet spot of, okay, I know that I need to tell a story, but my story is kind of like everybody else's, so how do I tell it differently? Our goal is to give you the tools that you can steal so that you can attract customers to your winery. It's great once they're there and they have that experience. Well, how exciting is it to go up that lane of trees and you've got the beautiful structures and you walk into a little slice of heaven, and that experience is something that you give customers when they get to your property. I want to help people get to your property. So I'm going to continue what Jeff started, focus in a little bit more on just how important that story is. So thanks again for tracking with me. I don't know if you know any winemakers that aren't big idea folks. They go in thinking, I'm passionate, I want to give back, I want to do something. I might have had a 9-to-5 that I just really wasn't happy with, so I took a complete left turn and got into winemaking. However they got there, the winemakers that we all know are very passionate, big idea people. But what you might see that we're walking into is an environment where there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the winemaker saying, I've got great product. I've got award-winning wines. Why am I seeing a sales decrease or a plateau? And then there's the consumer on this side who says, can't somebody actually just answer my call for good wine? What are they missing? Well, now, the disconnect is this gap that marketing is going to help us solve. It's the stories that we need to tell consumers that they can take on for themselves. And something that Daniela and I and Jeff and many people in this room really feel strongly about is this book that we read by Seth Godin called All Marketers Are Liars or Storytellers, right? Now, that's almost a handbook for marketers now because it addresses the opportunity to tell your story in a unique way and engage somebody when you're talking about hundreds of wineries that are competing for that same person. So how do you tell your story differently? They don't buy facts, but they do buy stories. Now, how often is this the case where our labels might be beautiful and they might have all the right specs on them? And to Daniela's point earlier this morning, they, of course, cover the regulatory side, the legal side of things. But if you're sitting on shelf, what kind of story are you telling when you're in a sea of other ones? Other wineries with similar stories to tell. They might have the same origin story about starting out in a basement or starting out as a hobby that turned into a passion that turned into a career. Love it. Everybody tells the same story. How can you at shelf tell your story in a unique way? So what I want to accomplish today is just giving you the tools to dive deep into what Scott talked about. Dive deep into what Jeff talked about. Take it one step further. What is your unique story unique to you? And I don't want to make this sound like it has to be very flashy. It doesn't have to be anything advertising-wise. It just needs to be your story, and you need to tell it in an effective way. But as we've heard, a lot of people focus on the product side of winemaking, and sometimes we don't take a step back and see our wineries as a customer would see it. And that's a really important thing to do. It's a gut check every once in a while. Something else that we want to accomplish is just gaining the kind of confidence we need that our team can do this. All of these tools that we're talking about today, most of them are available for free, and they're available to everybody right now if you know how to use them. But a lot of times, marketing can be a big, scary animal that nobody really wants to address, which is why Daniela and the team put together License to Steal, right? Because we want to share these ideas that everybody can use. Scott Colby, that's me. And I had great pleasure of working with a bunch of cool brands in the beverage space. It's my passion. And I was even an assistant brewer for a couple years. And it's just because I'm curious. I want to know what it's like to actually be producing the products and the beverages that I market. I don't feel like I'm credible unless I can really tell it at that level. Jim Beam and Maker's Mark and some other just fun companies to work with. But our goal as advisors to Craft is we want you to have the same tools that we had access to when we were working for those companies. All of this is accessible. It's just a matter of we're working with small teams. You know, we're not working with a 100-person marketing team. We're talking about somebody who's a winemaker, an owner, somebody who wears multiple hats, one of which is marketing. If you had access to the same tools that these folks did, and you know how to use them, well, then you'd be just as effective on the smaller scale, but effective all the same. We really call it brand vibe, and the word gets thrown around a lot, but you know what that vibe is. Like when Scott was talking earlier about not knowing really how to describe it, it's just that feeling you get. Well, we think that you can actually set your sights on a vibe, and then everything that you do in your tasting room and your marketing efforts and your touch points with your customers, current and prospective, gives them a feeling that Scott was talking about, gives them that feeling before they even walk into your winery. Now, how exciting would that be? Because it's not just about catering to the current customer. As you're going to see tomorrow, we want you to have access to a bigger audience, because year one and year two, for some of us who are just starting out in the winemaking business, 5 or 10 years, however long you've been, 25, however long you've been in existence, you are starting to see the challenge, and everybody is equal at that point when we're talking about customers who have infinite choice. And if you're not telling a story, you're not standing out. If you're not standing out, you're not going to get the first visit, let alone repeat visits from new customers. I want you to have access to a whole new audience, not just your regulars. Brand vibe is a model that we use, and it starts out with the story because it has to, but then it takes a look at how you tell that story, where you tell that story. Something that's extremely important to us is, do you know anything about your competitors? Sometimes it's anecdotal. You've visited the winery down the street. You know in general what their price points are at retail. But you need to be an expert in your competitors in order to win with customers that could choose them over you. We have opportunity to really talk about content worth sharing. It's all about content. It's the content that's actually giving the new customer who's never set foot in your winery the tools they need to make the choice to visit you. To the extent that you control that content, socially, digitally, and otherwise, a lot of these things are in your grasp, but you're not necessarily sending the right messages out right now. Marketing plan and budget, I don't want to over-formalize this, but you have to set time and money aside for marketing. I think you're going to hear that this entire week, right? And then resources internally to execute. How are we doing? My volume okay? And all right. They buy what they want, not necessarily what they need. It's easy to say, I need to buy a bottle of wine for dinner this weekend. What they buy is actually the story told at retail, if they're talking about going to an on-premise or off-premise. What they buy when they choose between wineries is the story that they're being told. It's not they just need wine, otherwise they'd go to the one closest to their house. This is the experience that you want to give somebody when they're at your property. And that picture is really what you want to understand. Who is your customer now? Now, is this an older demographic, a younger demographic? Is it couples? Is it woo-woo? Who is visiting your winery right now? And then, again, take a step back. Is that a big enough audience for you? Is it too specific? Are you starting to see some of your regulars go somewhere else, look for different experiences? The more you can picture your customer, even what that person's age is, their education, what interests them, what they're frustrated with, what frustrates them about the wine industry. Is it how complicated it is? Is that why we have so many rosé and champagne sales? Those are easy stories to tell, plus they get a boatload of publicity, especially rosés, right? Well, their worldview might be wine is very complicated. How do you address that worldview with your social media, with your marketing, with your tasting room? How approachable is the experience? Villains stand in the way of you connecting with that customer. And we know how that works. I have a challenge with the winemaking industry. For some reason, it confuses me. I'm anxious about it, and so I'm not even going to try it. If we can address those, if we can break those down for customers, then effectively we are giving them an invitation to give us a try. And with thousands of wineries out there, there's less and less competition because you're actually trying to connect with the customer in a way that they want to be talked to. And there are a lot of words here, but suffice it to say, the customers that you're going to be targeting out in the world, they might resemble people in your tasting room this very minute. Have you asked these customers what interests them? Where are they visiting from? I like the idea that was floated about the pins on the map and things like this. Are you collecting data about your customers every single day? I don't mean to make this sound like a survey or a science project. It doesn't have to be. It's your winery tasting room folks who are actually your front line for collecting this information. What does a staff meeting look like? Are you able to just say, hey, what did we learn this week about our customers? Are they open to that kind of conversation? Start to ask these questions. You start to paint a bigger picture about your customer. And then what you do is, okay, now that we know who our current customer is and we see some opportunities, where do we find more people like that? That's marketing. Doesn't have to be the advertising that gets the Mad Men, Don Draper bad rap, right? It's more about just common sense. I want to communicate with people who want my wine. Where do I find those people? But a lot of times we don't take the time for those conversations because we're doing a lot of other things. I completely get it. And once you understand who the customer is, talk to everybody in the winery about it. Let them know, because the more they get this information, the more they know to look to collect more information for you. They also know better aspects of your business, which always makes people more effective. Next piece is really talking about where the brand is going to take a customer. And this is another book that we really lean heavily on, and it's Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And I know we have a huge list of reading materials, and good on you if you're able to make it through it anytime this lifetime. But the Audible version gets you through it really quickly if you're doing the commute especially. His point is building a story brand, and Donald Miller. And again, you'll have access to this too. His point is brilliant. Brands need to tell you exactly what you should expect. And this is, again, a differentiator, especially if there are 20 choices in a region, 300 choices in a state. Whatever the concentration of wineries, I need for mine to stand out. And you stand out by transparency and authority, of course. Your mission is simply enough, it's what you stand for, what you're going after. And surprisingly, or not so, customers are taking a look past the fancy side of brands, and they're taking a look at what you stand for, whether that's sustainability, community, sourcing practices, any of your hiring practices, donations, support, any of these things that you stand for, let people know, because this is a differentiator for you. Bigger than just the brand, bigger than the accolades and the awards and the actual liquid. This is how customers are buying nowadays. They're buying brands that align with their moral compass. And we all know this to be true, right? You'll choose perhaps an organic farmer locally over mass-produced 5 states away, even if it's at a 20% premium price. Sometimes you have that luxury. Sometimes you're able to make that choice. Sometimes it's not so easy. But it definitely factors into the thinking. We're just wired that way nowadays. Customers and consumers coming up, call it whatever generation you want. I think it's more just a mindset of, you better be transparent because I have a lot of choices and I have infinite access to all the research I need in the world to make an informed decision about what brands I stand behind. You're not going to get my money unless you align with the way I think. This is how people are buying. I think we need to get comfortable with that. You have maybe loose statements of mission. I say formalize it. Put it up on your website. Let people know about it. Be proud of it. Patagonia is a great example of this. And what we try to do is just stretch you a little bit. I could easily just talk about Greenvale, who did a Nancy, right? Yeah. Okay, so I could talk about Nancy's efforts with Greenvale, and I could say, well, their mission statement, and to be honest, this was the best example of all the participants that I saw, because it clearly laid out the 4 aspects of the mission that are important. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but no, it's to the extent that you let customers in, let them behind the scenes. Very similar to Patagonia, everybody knows this mission statement. I mean, they are a brand that stands behind that statement alone. Now, not saying this has to be heady. It doesn't have to be very pretty or perfect. It just has to be you. Stand for something and show people that you do. Another aspect of the Build a Story brand book is positioning yourself as the guide and not the hero, not the knight in shining armor that steps in and solves the problem that the customer has. We're not here to do that. Customers nowadays, and all of us, we don't want somebody to figure it out for us unless we're really in a hurry. We want to understand how things work. We want to understand why. We want to have the tools we need to make the decision for ourselves. And when we make the decision for ourselves, it should be no surprise that I'm going to stand 100% behind it until somebody really proves me wrong, because no one wants to be proven wrong. So if I make a decision that this is the brand I'm going to bring to my girlfriends, my families, the dinner, I'm going to take people to this winery for a reunion, you better believe that they've done the kind of research because they don't want to be embarrassed in their choice. So, you're not the hero. You want to be a guide. You want to give them that information that they need. Help them solve their problem in a way that they can own. Now, I use a couple words down here, and these are more for just examples, but you know what this looks like. I understand how complicated the wine industry must be. We've tried to simplify it by giving you straightforward descriptions of our varietals and fun and easy engaging website that helps you pick, and the labels stand out at shelf. Now, you haven't told them that I'm the best wine that you could drink. What you've done is you've addressed their problem and you've made it easy for them to choose you. Empathy, authority, testimonials, awards. A lot of you folks do a great job with the awards, and good on you. We've got a lot of award winners in the room. That's something that's not being braggart. It's just showing that the industry has recognized that these styles, varietals, and seasonals and core wines that you produce are worth recognizing. Consumers buy on that as well, and lots and lots of words. The point is, how do you want people to feel when they experience your message outside the winery? You know how they feel when they step foot inside your tasting room. You really control that. Like that's the one aspect of your customer interaction that you just nailed. Man, we've got this beautiful tasting room. It's well designed. It's open. It's airy. We've got this patio. You got it. But how do you want them to feel after they read your social media post? You think about that? How do you want them to feel after they check out your mobile or non-mobile website in some cases, right? Just be deliberate. Have an idea, set your sight on a goal, and then just take a step back and say, well, does my website deliver that? If I was a customer who's never met me before? Sometimes we get a little proud of ourselves, right? It's easy to think, wow, our wine is just that good. Or the website, we just spent a boatload of money on it, and what would your customers say about all your efforts? Zappos tells you the experience you're going to have before you even call them, before you place an order. Everybody knows Zappos, and you kind of get that story. Wow, I heard that story that somebody called for customer service and they ended up returning a set of snow tires. Zappos, and that was Macy's, I think, but Zappos will take anything back. Or, I had a problem with a customer and we ended up talking for 4 hours on the phone. I mean, you hear these stories about Zappos. Zappos empowers, Jeff talked a little bit about it as well, training. Zappos empowers their team to give every customer a stellar experience. And you have that expectation, kind of like CWK, Sharon and Scott, right? So we have a very deliberate effort on the website to show them the experience that they can have. And a lot of you folks have done a really good job with this, so forgive me for only highlighting certain aspects of it, but this one really stood out. This picture alone is one of the tours that they give, everybody having fun, but then it goes further to talk about the experience that you can expect once you get to CWK. Use these opportunities. A lot of times we just slap photos up there or let our social feed, populate the pages with pretty pictures that customers have put up there. We need to be a little more deliberate, a little more strategic than this. Everybody has a voice and a tone, and it's funny. It might not be something that you think about every day, but your visuals, your text, your website, your socials, everything is a reflection of your voice, who you are as a brand. And it's one thing to have a stellar tasting room experience where you can have one-on-one interaction with human to human, but if you're letting other things do the talking for you, what message are they saying? If you're letting a press release about a new seasonal or a new varietal or a new partnership do the talking for you, what message is it sending to the industry publications, the wine magazines that are going to pick you up? Remember that there are a lot of chains of communication there, and the further and further you get from the tasting room, the more difficult it is to keep that brand voice and personality. So I would say just raise your voice. You've got a voice. This is something that sets you apart. We have phrasing, photography, video. It's all about the content. And if you were to take a look at your own content on social, web, and otherwise, what would you say about it? What reflection is that, positive or negative, on your brand? Am I just like everybody else? Or what one thing really sets me apart from the others in the region? Lots of opportunities, email, tasting room, YouTube videos, all of these things, merchandise integrated, like we've talked about. All of those touch points are a positive or negative reflection on your brand. So again, a couple examples. Everybody is probably familiar with Duluth. I mean, love them or hate them, they've got very, very specific tone of voice, right? And they stand by it, and it's everything. It's the stores, it's the advertising, the catalogs, the website. The entire experience is very much the no sweat, no stink, no pinch mentality. Well, Old York actually put together a great website, and you see, obviously we emphasize the mobile aspect of these because we feel that mobile is the most important. Old York had some great voice and personality even on their homepage, and surprisingly, from the 45 plus wineries and attendance that we took a look at, there wasn't a whole lot of voice at all in the others. Not being critical, just pointing out some runway for us. There's an opportunity to do something today to change your voice. You don't need an agency or anybody to do that. You just need to take a little bit of time, understand what the voice is, and then put your text through that filter. If you were to take a look at your text with a pair of glasses that basically was your filter for whether or not it was telling your story, are you? What? My brand and voice, is it fun? Is it flirty? Is it approachable? Is it complex? Like, what are you going for, and did you achieve it? In the final couple slides here, definitely want to leave room for questions, but does anybody know what the story of Airborne is? Just shout it out. Don't.
It was created by a teacher.
Teacher.
Yeah.
Now, they actually print that story on the top of the box. And you're exactly right. That is their brand story, created by a teacher. Now, everybody, for the most part, knows that story because advertising that they've done and what they've heard about this, because they were kind of first to market, and now there are a lot of knockoffs. Well, the story can be created by a teacher. Is that 100% unique to them? No. It's unique to them in how they used it and how they leaned into it and how they owned it. And can somebody else, another product outside of that industry, say created by a teacher? Yeah, absolutely. But the point is that your story doesn't have to be 100% unique worldwide to you. Otherwise, we'll be beating ourselves up trying to figure out, well, is this absolutely different from the neighbor down the street? It's how you apply it, whether it's with your tasting room, with your packaging, with your website, that gives you that kind of first mover advantage. Well, yeah, maybe somebody else could tell it, but they're not going to tell it as good as I do. And customers recognize this. So there are a lot of different ways to go after a story. And we talked a bit this morning about the story that's told on site at the winery and the design, how deliberately that's architected so that you control the experience, you shape the experience. It can be told by way of social media. But I would ask you, your story can take a bunch of different forms. You could be trying to solve a problem with the industry. You know, as winemakers, we were tired. We were tired of the stuffy attitude that Napa Valley has imposed on the rest of the U.S. wine market, and so we're flying in the face of that with approachable wines, with fun labels, and whatever it is, that's a problem that you're addressing. Yours could be we're the underdog, kind of the Avis story in other industry terms. We're trying harder. We're trying harder to earn your business. We're trying harder to create new and innovative wines. We want to do things differently than the norm. You could have a huge group of fans already, at which point you just embrace it. You let them take over. When you have a huge fan base that's telling you what's important about your brand, that's when you just sit back and listen. You don't tell them anything different. You start to gather that information and you feed back to other customers like them, because when you've got rabid fans, they're going to be ambassadors for you. You can't ask for better advertising than that. Do it with confidence. Do good. You know, one of my examples would be Life is Good. Life is Good is a brand of clothing, and they've expanded to other merch, and those things are important to them, the do good message. But they're not following a template. You know, advertisers, like we talked about this morning, have a tendency to go at it like a formula. You're thinking Procter & Gamble and Huggies diapers and things like this. When you were advertising 20 years ago, you had to be very structured in how you did it. Now, the customer is dictating how you talk to them and whether or not they allow you to talk to them, which means that you don't have to put your story in a format that looks like this. That's when we beat ourselves up again. It's because we're trying to shoehorn what is the energy and excitement about my brand into somebody else's format. That's not going to mean anything to you. How can it mean anything to your customers? Warby Parker. Anybody know Warby Parker? Anybody buy a Warby Parker? Okay, so we have a couple fans. They've changed the eyewear industry making it very easy to shop at home, which is odd for eyewear, especially I wear it myself, to think that I can't go in and try it on and I have to have a really formal process with my prescription and whatever. No, they're making it approachable. This is a disruptor in a very static industry, and they're killing it right now. What does their story look like? Their story is exactly this. There's not a format. Rebellious spirit. I mean, just feel it. Rebellious spirit, lofty objective to offer designer eyewear at that really affordable price while still being conscious of business practices. Now, the website has that on the About Us page, and then the home page is even easier than that. We want you to look good and still have some money in your pocket. That designer eyewear that leaves you with cash in your pocket. Now, yours is going to be different than that, but it's probably going to have a similar level of passion. Riedel, right? Tomorrow morning, everybody is going to hear this story. And whether or not you believe it doesn't matter, because so many people do believe it, it makes it true. Finely tuned bowls to help translate the message of wine to our senses. Whew, man. They've obviously made $2 or $3 using that as a story because they have trained customers to believe that. And as a customer who buys Riedel glassware, there's nobody who's going to talk me out of that story because I have committed. You're going to have to really tell me something compelling to make me second guess my purchase of the expensive Riedel glassware specific to my Merlot. Left Foot Charlie, Meredith, right? Meredith, right. So, I mean, just cool story. Now, whether this was deliberately positioned as the story behind the brand, the fact that Left Foot Charlie, I'm paraphrasing, was basically a nickname for Brian because of inward left foot issue all throughout school and such. And then he just kind of leaned into it and paid that off with, I was falling in the dirt as a kid, now I have a different appreciation for terroir. Yeah, and I mean, I had the same response. I'm like, all right, now that's clever. People are going to latch on to these things because that's different than everybody else's. How that influences the wine, how it influences the tasting room experience, events, things like this, they could really go far with that. Whether or not they do, we'd have to ask Meredith, but fun. It's a fun story. And then lastly, the stories have to spread quickly. We are consuming media at such a fast pace that this is not something that we should expect our consumers to take any time with. And I feel like you folks have done just an amazing job on the websites, and there's a lot of content there, and very few of the websites are scannable. And I don't mean that to be critical, just again to show the opportunity. If you were a consumer swiping up and down on a mobile phone, trying to decide which winery you were going to pick for a weekend visit or time with your girlfriends or a reunion, are you giving them the information in a quick way that they need to make that call? Because if you're not, you're losing them. Somebody else is. So, please be very conscious of how much content and, again, the voice and personality and what you put up at the top of your website, which hopefully is mobile friendly by now. Give them the chance to discover you because, again, we're not the hero, We're just the guide. So we give them the information that they need to make the decision, embrace it for themselves. Photos, man, it surprises me that there just aren't that many photos out there. There are beautiful photos of the tasting room and maybe some product shots and vineyards. I get a little bit of those, but show people having fun at your winery, because consumers who are deciding whether or not to visit you or 20 others want to see themselves in that picture. That very picture could be them. If I'm making the decision to say yes or no to your winery, have you made it easy for them to see themselves there? Product pages fall flat for me. I'm sorry, but there were not very many product pages that brought the brand to life for me. Personality, tone, words. I got a lot of descriptions of the wine, but very little personality in the actual pages. That's a huge miss. Opportunity. And then content calendars was a great one that Jeff brought up. Just be deliberate. It's all in your control, but knowing what you're going to post establishes a routine, a consistency that your customers can appreciate. And they know that you're serious about it, not just half-baking an effort. We really liked Linganore. This, for a number of reasons, there was consistency across web, social, similar posting style, consistency on the calendar. And there were a number of brands that did this well, but this one stood out to us. So again, having a little bit of tone, a little bit of personality that's reflected not only on the website, but on the other avenues as well. Just like Southwest offers that level of transparency, and transparency is their advertising kind of marketing term for it. But I mean, how many years has that been going on? And they completely lean into it with no change fees and completely upfront about baggage cost and whatnot. There's no other airline that's doing it that well. So what we discussed today was really understanding your customer, giving yourself permission to talk about your mission with that customer, helping yourself stand out when a lot of competitors are out there, really shaping the experience, having a voice and a personality, telling that story and enabling discovery. So with that, I'd love to, depending on our schedule, I'd love to open it up. Perfect, yeah. Any questions? I know there was a lot there. And
No, I will share with you. We go to a tourism conference every year in Ohio, and the gal who runs it is just amazing. And I walk up to her and I say, "Am I going to have a headache when this thing is over?" And she says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Because when I go to a conference and I leave with a headache, I know there's so much to absorb, I have a hard time managing it within the brain that exists in this head. So I hope some of you are going to leave with a headache today, because the volume of information here has been incredible, I think.
there is a lot, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
I did like the last slide for Red Shedman's, the shareability on the posting.
Yep.
Because I do that. When I see a site that if there's an article, I always will post it somewhere. Either LinkedIn, if it's a business, or Facebook that my friends, I mean, that, to me, I try to track that as much as possible, is shareability of your story.
It's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. From a social perspective, any content worth publishing is worth sharing. Think about it that way. Should be worth sharing.
Question over here.
Yep.
I'm just revamping my website and the product page, and listing our wines. How do you bring your wines
Repeat the question.
to life?
Sure. Yeah. So the question was, they're in the process, and what winery, sorry?
Bishop Estate.
Bishop Estate, okay. Thank you. So Bishop Estate is revamping their winery, and she asked the question of how you really bring the product pages to light in the way that we suggest. I think everybody is familiar with a standard website just listing the style and the specs and the winemaker at best. And a lot of times we see a label. Possibly we see like a behind the scenes photo or even a video. Now, it's a good start, but just imagine if that wine had a voice. What would it say to a customer who had never experienced it before? I'm not trying to be heady about it, but there's a, let's say if your wine was fun or flirty, or if it was serious and premier or premium. Now those are two very different voices. How would that voice be reflected in the 3 sentences of copy that accompany the label and the wine specs? I would just challenge you to imagine that brand as a brother or sister, and my younger brother has a very different voice than I do, and he's extroverted and he's wild like that, and he has the beard. He's just a different person. We're built from the same cloth, but how would that wine be different from a different varietal or a seasonal? Use that as a canvas to paint a picture. Broad strokes and fluffy clouds. I'm not trying to be ethereal about it. Let's be practical and just say something other than it's a delicious, full-bodied red. I mean, a lot of people can say that. I hope that helps. It's definitely a tough one, but it's low-hanging fruit, literally. Sure.
So we kind of piggyback off of hers.
Yep.
We started allowing our customers to leave feedback on the wines, just because that's what people are used to seeing on the online marketplaces now in some kind of review format. And our sales have gone through the roof through our online
Repeat the
sales.
comment.
Just based on the fact that people are able to see
Yeah.
what other people like.
So, and which winery are you with?
Woodbury Vineyards.
Woodbury. Thank you. So the comment was, Woodbury Vineyards has opened up the kimono and really allowed customers and visitors to the winery website to provide feedback. And it's so important. Reviews and being very transparent. We're not talking about Yelp. Everybody has their own opinion about Yelp. Yelp is pay to play, and it's funny how the negatives rise to the top and one negative shoots down 100 positives. Show the spectrum of the experience with the wine, good and bad, because that transparency actually earns you points with customers who are researching it for themselves. So good for you. And he said the winery is experiencing huge growth because of that transparency. So that's something you should steal from him. Yeah. I'm probably at the end of my time. I'm going to be here tomorrow. I certainly appreciate you folks and for Daniela and Jen putting this together. So thank you.
Are we easy there? Okay, we have like another gap. Chris is stuck. Yell at him when you see him on the field. Because the goal of this session was sort of a steel concept. So we're going to continue with the steel concept. Does anybody know Stir and Doers?